not the mizbeach which transforms the limbs into ash, but rather what is it? What is it? It's chatzos. Chatzos. It marnami amram b'chia bar abba. Pershu. Supposed to listen to this. This is their support. Pershu kodim chatzos. If the limbs were on the Abba, obviously those limbs have to be on the mizbeach at some point in time. But the idea is, but the idea is that if they were taken up before chatzos, they don't need to be on there at chatzos in order to be transformed into ash. Wherever they are transformed into ash. Pershu kodim chatzos, vechziron achar chatzos. So we learned that what? That if the limbs were taken off the mizbeach before chatzos, and you put them back on after chatzos, lo nanin v'lo mo'alin. Ultimately, again, you shouldn't get hana from it, but if you did so, there is no mi'ilah, which I say ultimately means that what? That really it's a isur derabana, meaning midaraisa, chatzos transforms it into ash. We just rabbinically don't want you using it for your own benefit. The Chintana bar Kafra, Shmuel bar Kafra taught, Pirshu kodim chatzos, if you remove the limbs from the mizbeach before chatzos, vechziron la'achar chatzos, and you put them back on after chatzos, yotzin midei mi'ilah. Both say they are no longer subject to mi'ilah. So we'll say, so this is the groundbreaking shita of Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says that even if the limbs are not on the mizbeach at the time of chatzos, nevertheless, what? Chatzos itself transforms the limbs into ash. So it comes chatzos, ultimately, again, those limbs are considered to be deshen. So now the Gemara says, if that's true, Rav Yosef, now that you just told me that halacha is like Rav Yosef, namely, that chatzos transforms the limbs into ash, even if what? Even if what? They are not on the mizbeach at the time of chatzos. V'amr b'chia bar kafra, v'chintani bar kafra, Rabba v'Rav Chisda b'may pligi. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. If that's the case, that we follow Rav Yosef, that chatzos transforms the limbs into ash, even if they're not on the mizbeach, then what are Rabba and Rav Yosef arguing about? Right? We'll say, remember again, Rabba and Rav Yosef had the following case. They said that if you had limbs on the mizbeach before chatzos, and you took it off before chatzos, and returned it again before what? Before alos. Or case number 2 was after alos. So you always have Rabba saying, you have to put it back on, and it needs another chatzos. The following midnight will transform it into ash. Rav Yosef, depending on the case, gives his sheet, but I don't understand. If indeed, Rav Chisda, if indeed we hold like Rav Yosef, that midnight transforms the limbs into ash, even if what? They are not actually situated on the mizbeach, then what are Rabba and Rav Yosef arguing about? It doesn't matter whether you put the limbs back on the altar or not. Once chatzos comes, those limbs by definition are going to be ash. To which the Gemara says, what are they arguing about? Amarlei bishmeinim. Oh, we'll say, what are they talking about? Very fatty limbs. So you will say, the assumption is that even if limbs are taken off the altar before chatzos, they were burned somewhat, to the point that what? The basic meat moisture is gone, and they're hardened. Rabbi and Chisda are arguing about a case where we say shmeinim, a very fatty meat, and in the case of very fatty meat, when it's removed before the mizbeach, from the mizbeach, it still has a shtickle status of meat. Because it has a status of meat, then what? It has to be returned to the mizbeach. That's where their machlokas is. But in the case where the meat has been sufficiently charred, even before chatzos, to the point that the meat moisture is gone, then comes chatzos, even if the meat is not on the mizbeach, ultimately, again, it is transformed into ash. Both say, and I'll tell you, this is a very important piece of halacha l'maisa, because I want you to remember these halachos. So the Rambam writes as follows. The Rambam says, this is in Hilchos Mi'ilah, Perek Beis, Halacha Yud Beis. La'akar chatzos, ein mo'alin bahen, afa pi shepaku kodim chatzos. Supposed to listen to this. Kevin shegia chatzos halayla, na'asu kol ha'evarim kimishin is achlu, v'na'asu efer. Both say the halacha is, this is how the Rambam paskins like Rav Yosef. Namely, this is very important. If you have limbs that were on the mizbeach, assuming that they were charred, and they were taken off, so let's go back. What's the easy case? We already established this yesterday. Everyone agrees that if the limbs are on the mizbeach at the time of chatzos, then what? They're ash. then we're good. That's the easy case. The ash already after, right? Before chatzos, it's meat. After chatzos, it's ash. What happens if it was taken off before chatzos? So the Rambam paskins like Rav Yosef. That what? That halacha lemaisa. So he says, kevan shegiya chatzos halayla naaseh kol ha'evarim kimishin is achlu v'naasu efer. Rabosai comes chatzos limbs, sacrificial limbs, as long as they are burnt, are considered to be ash, even if what? Even if they are not actively on the Mizbeach. So we'll say that is indeed how the Rambam paskins, like Rav Yosef. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. Boy mine Rava me Rava. So we'll say, Rava asked the following kasha of Rava. Lina mo'eles berosh ha-Mizbeach, o eina mo'eles berosh ha-Mizbeach. So we'll say, listen to this case. Lina means as follows. If you go ahead and let's say you shecht a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash, and you don't do anything with it. You don't do zrika, you don't burn the sacrificial parts, you just leave it lying inside the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll say that, and let's say and you leave it lying there until the next morning. That's called lina. Lina means literally letting a carbon lie around past the permitted sacrificial window. And obviously, again, it's puzzle. You can't do anything with the puzzle. You take it outside of it. You can't do anything with the carbon because it's puzzle. You take it outside of the Beis HaMikdash and burn it in the Beis HaDashen. Here's the interesting question. What happens, Rabosai, if you shechted the carbon, you didn't do the sacrificial services, but you left it on top of the altar? You leave it on top of the Mizbeach. Is that called lina or not? So lina ma'eles b'rosh hasham Mizbeach, or ino ma'eles b'rosh hasham Mizbeach? Say, hey, what's the case? Ilei madilo yardu. If you want to say you began the avod on top of the Mizbeach, you didn't finish it, but you never brought the animal down, you left it on top of the altar. Hashta, lanu ba'azara amrit, dilo yardu, berosho sham Mizbeach miboy. So we'll say ultimately again, so if that's the case, that it was on the Mizbeach, right? Ilema dilo yardu. So we'll say if it was on the Mizbeach and it never came down, then what? Look at Rashi. Ilema dilo yardu. Osan shematzam b'shacha b'rosh ha-Mizbeach shelo b'ma'aracha. If they were on the top of the Mizbeach and they never came down, then if that's the case, then what? Hashta lanu ba'azara. In the case of where the animal was left in the azara, amrit delo yerdu. So we'll say in that case, so we'll say let's say you left an animal overnight in the Mizbeach, you didn't offer it up, and you inadvertently went ahead and then offered it up on the Mizbeach. So we'll say what's talacha? We already established this. Lo yerdu. Such a carbon is not brought down. Berosh hasham Mizbeach miboy. The Rebbe say all the more so if the animal itself is left on the top of the Mizbeach, then what? Then halacha l'maisa, we leave it there and we allow you to offer it up. Ve'ela diyardu. Rather, it must be the case where the animal was left on the top of the Mizbeach overnight, then it was taken down. So the shaila now is what? Can you bring it back up and offer it? So the shulchan midamine, so also here's the shaila. Do we compare a carbon left on the top of the Mizbeach throughout the night to the lechem hapanim on the shulchan? I will say that this is actually quite interesting. This night, because what do we know about the shulchan? Afilu hein ala shulchan yamim rabim ein bekach klum. I will say, how did lechem hapanim work? Remember, Kohanim went on shift on Shabbos. So comes Shabbos, a new batch of lechem hapanim is placed on the Mizbeach, placed on the shulchan, excuse me. What happens with the old batch? The old batch is given to the outgoing shift of Kohanim. The new batch is placed on the shulchan. When the new set of Kohanim finish their tour a week later, they are given those loaves which were placed on the Mizbeach when they came on shift. Good morning, Mr. Schoenfeld. So now the Mishnah deals with an interesting situation. We'll say, let's say, for some reason, somebody just was derelict in their responsibilities, and they never took the lechem hapanim off the shulchan. Well, let's say now again, remember lechem hapanim. There's a miracle anyway; they always stay fresh. So 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. Well, let's say the following case. What happens? So someone forgot to remove the lechem hapanim from the shulchan. They just forgot to remove the lechem hapanim. So we'll say, so what happens? So the Gemara says, so this not afilu hein ala shulchan yamim rabim. Even if the lechem was left on the shulchan for many days, ein bekach klum. It's okay. It's okay. And I will say, now this is an incredibly dramatic idea. Now the logic behind this, I will say, is as follows, which is, Since the lechem apanim is on the shulchan is the rightful place for the lechem apanim. So failure to remove the loaves and dispense them to the kohanim is not good, but what? Doesn't invalidate the lechem. So do we say that a carbon which was not offered but left on top of the mizbeach is effectively what? The equivalent of loaves of bread left on the shulchan. And just as loaves of bread left on the shulchan do not become disqualified, even though they've been on the shulchan too long, so to a carbon which was slaughtered but not sacrificed, but left on top of the mizbeach, also doesn't become possibilina. So the Gemara says, "Oh Dilma, lekarka midamina," or maybe not. Maybe we compare the top of the mizbeach to what? To the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. And what happens if you slaughtered a sacrificial animal, failed to offer it, left it on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash overnight? Then what's the status of the animal? Pasul. So Moshe, see here, this is quite riveting. This is really quite riveting, quite amazing. So Moshe, so now this actually is an interesting case where the carbon was slaughtered, left on top of the mizbeach overnight. What's the shaila? Cohen shows up the next morning, and what does he want to know? Can I offer it? Can I offer it? Can I eat it? Can I offer it? Can I sprinkle? What can I do with it? So Shai says, what do we compare it to? Do we compare a carbon left on the top of the mizbeach, ultimately again, to the loaves of the lechem aparim left on the shulchan, and say just as loaves that are left over time on the shulchan still remain valid because they're in the right place, So to a carbon left on the top of the mizbeach, even though again the avodah has not been done, is in the right place. Therefore, the avodah can be done the next day, or no. Or is the top of the mizbeach the same thing as the floor of the Beis Hamikdash? What happens if the kohen slaughters an animal, gets a phone call, runs out, leaves the animal there, forgets to come back, right? He leaves there, finds it there the next morning. It's possible. Maybe a carbon left on the top of the mizbeach is also dramatic shaila. Amar lei, lina b'rosh Hashem mizbeach. So he said to him, he responded, there is no such thing as lina on the top of the mizbeach. And I was about to say that halacha l'maisa, something left on the top of the mizbeach effectively is what? Is considered to be like lechem apanim left on the shulchan for an extended amount of time, that although it is not good, we don't want it, but halacha l'maisa, it does not become invalidated. Kibla minei olo. So we'll say, did he accept this answer or not? So tashma de itmar evarim shalanu ba'azara. If you have limbs that were left over in the azara, right in the Beis Hamikdash, mekater b'holei kol halayla, you could burn the limbs over the course of the entire night. Lan berosh Hashem mizbeach. We'll see what happens if the limbs are left on top of the mizbeach. So they weren't burned, but they were left on top of the mizbeach. So then what's the halacha? Lan berosh Hashem mizbeach. Mekater v'holech liolam. Ultimately, again, we'll say as long as they remained on top of the mizbeach, you could burn them for however long you want. However, yardu, once they go ahead and are brought down from the mizbeach, then what? Rabba Amar Yalu. Rabba says they can be taken back up. Rava Amar Lo Yalu. Rava says ultimately again they cannot be taken back up. Shmamina lo kibla minei shmamina. We'll say so. See from here that Rava ultimately did not accept the logic of Rava. So we'll say, so what do we say halacha lemaisa in this case? So watch this. So the Rambam, this is in Perek Gimel of Hilchos Psuli HaMukdashin. Halacha Yud Aleph. Get ready for this. Ready? Good. Eivarim v'chalavim. So we'll say if you have limbs and forbidden fats, I should say, ukimatzim shalanu berosh Hashem mizbeach. So we'll say, by the way, you could see totally how this kind of case could happen. Remember again, what's unfolding over here? You have a carbon. You have leftover limbs of a carbon. What are you supposed to do with leftover limbs? You burn it. So we'll say, obviously, in order to burn it, what do you have to do? Kohen has to bring it up to the mizbeach. Now, so we often assume that presumably he goes in and just throws it on the fire. Let's say the fire needs more wood. So what does he do? He places the limbs down by the side, goes to get more wood for the ma'aracha. It could just be he forgets about the limbs. Sometimes you just forget where you put your limbs. It happens, right? So we'll say what happens? He goes ahead, he puts down the limbs, he forgets about them. Only when he comes back the next morning to go ahead and to remove the desh and to remove the ash, he realizes that he forgot limbs by the side of the mizbeach. What's the shaila? The shaila now is they have gone ahead and remained on the top of the mizbeach overnight, unoffered overnight. is that lina or not? So the Rambam paskins Eivarim, limbs, chalavim, fats, kamatzim. We'll say kamatzim is the komets. Shalanu b'rosh Hashem mizbeach that are left unoffered overnight on the top of the mizbeach. Ki'ilu lanu ba'azara. We'll say staying unoffered overnight on the top of the mizbeach is the equivalent of staying unoffered on the floor of the mizbeach. Now watch this. Now, but what does that mean? Therefore, v'im yardu lo yalu. If they were mistakenly taken off the mizbeach, then what? You can't bring them back up to offer them, right? Instead, you take them out of the base of mikdash, you burn them there. Avalim lo yardu. But Rabbi say if they were never taken off the mizbeach, then what? Maktirin osan li olam. Then halacha lamaisa, you could burn them whenever you remember your mistake. So Rabbi says if halacha lamaisa, the kohen only realizes that 5 days later. Right, he realizes that he didn't offer up the limbs, but the limbs are still sitting there on top of the mizbeach. Then what? You can still offer it up. Which we'll say now. Why? What's the logic of that? The logic of that is because limbs on the top of the mizbeach are the equivalent of what? Are the bread, the loaves, lechem apanim on the shulchan. As long as they're there, it's fine. The problem is once you take it off, it's invalid. So as long as it's on the mizbeach, it can be offered up whenever you discover it. The only so therefore, whenever you discover it. 5 days later, 2 days later, 3 weeks later, whenever it is, you could burn it on the mizbeach. Once you take it down, however, then halacha l'maaseh says puzzle cannot be offered up. So also we kind of, to a certain degree, we kind of play it both ways. On one hand, the Rambam paskins that lina on top of the mizbeach is the equivalent to lina in the azara on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, again, halacha l'maaseh, if you bring it down, you can't bring it back up. That being said, if it remains on top of the mizbeach, you can in fact burn it whenever you discover it. Beautiful. So it says the Gemara. Kashem sham mizbeach mekadesh. So let's listen to this. Tana Rabbanan. So remember, the Mishnah said that the same way that the mizbeach ultimately sanctifies, so too again does the kavesh, does the altar, and also does a kli. So Tana Rabbanan hanogeh b'mizbeach. If something touches the mizbeach, it becomes sanctified. In the ela mizbeach, that only means the mizbeach. Kevesh Mirai. We'll say, how do we know that once sacrificial parts touch the kevesh, touch the ram, that they also become sanctified? Talmud Lomar, es hamizbeach. We'll say the Torah uses lashon of es. Es is always a ribui. Es always comes to include something additional. So kli sharis Mirai. How do we know that even once a sacrificial item comes into a service utensil, it becomes kodesh as well? So the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, kol hanogea bahem yikdash. Therefore, the pasuk says anything that touches them will become sanctified. This is an interesting question. Does a klishares have the ability to be makdish something that is puzzle? Now Rashi points out over here that the assumption of the question is as follows, which is, if something that is ritually invalid, sacrificially invalid, comes into a klishares, does the klisharis have the ability to be makdishit to the point that ultimately the item could be redeemed? Amarle, Tinisua, we learn this. Kashem sham mizbeach va'kevesh mekachin es haroy lehem. Kach kele mekachin, the same way that the mizbeach and the ramp have the ability to sanctify something, so too again a kli also has the ability to sanctify something. Amarle, no. Lechatchila likarev kami baili. No. What I'm asking, I will say, is as follows. What I'm asking is that halacha l'maaseh, if you have something that was invalid to be offered, and then you put it inside the klishares, does the klishares enable you lechatchila to now offer up that item? So he answers, Hanami Tanina. We learn this as well. We'll say Amud Beis shekiblu psulin v'zarku es damo. One of the cases in the Mishnah Bosai was where what? Was where an item where Kabbalah was done, Kabbalah of the blood, was done by apostle, and then he went ahead and threw the blood. My lav shekiblu psulin v'zarku psulin. But so we're not talking about a case where what? Where halacha l'maisa, there was a apostle who did the Kabbalah, and a kohen who's apostle, and who also did the zrika. So we'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, shekiblu psulin, v'hadar zarku psulin, v'lamali zarku, me Kabbalah ifsalalei. So we'll listen to this. So one of the cases of the Mishnah Bosai was where Kabbalah and zrika were done by psulin. Right? What did the Mishnah say? If Kabbalah and zrika were done by psulin, if Kabbalah and Zrika are done by Psulin, so ultimately again, Im Alu Lo Yerdu. So what the unasked question is as follows: why do you need Kabbalah and Zrika to be done by a pasul? At the end of the day, once Kabbalah is done by a Kohen who is pasul, then what? Then the avodah should be pasul. It must be because even if the Kabbalah is done by a Kohen who is pasul, once the blood comes into a klishares, the klishares is metaheret, and therefore again the blood only subsequently becomes invalid when the zrika is done by a pasul. So you see from here that what? You see from here that a klishares has the ability to make kosher even something that is ritually invalid. To which the Gemara says, no, lo shekiblu psulin inami shezarku psulin. No. The way to read that case in the Mishnah Abosai is what? Or is how? Is that ultimately, again, the case was where either Kabbalah or Zrika was ultimately done by someone who is a pasul. But halacha l'maisa, again, it doesn't require that both. I.e., klisharis ultimately, again, cannot go ahead and remedy something that was unfit for the Mizbeach suddenly to be fit. So we'll say, listen to this. So I'll tell you this halacha. I'll tell you what this halacha is. All right, you know what? I'm going to save this halacha for the end if we have time, because actually this halacha is a much more expansive halacha, not just about klisharis, but ultimately, again, what the Mizbeach does. So either we'll get to it later today or tomorrow, Mirza Hashem. Avir Mizbeach, Mizbeach Tamila. We'll say now the Gemara transitions to another shayla. What about airspace of the Mizbeach? So we'll say this is a fascinating shayla. Airspace of the, look at Rashi just a moment. Avir HaMizbeach is almost right across in Rashi. Imtala Ivarim Psulin, Ba'avir Rosh HaMizbeach, Kimizbeach Tami V'lo Yerd. Supposed to listen to this. If you go ahead and you take Ivarim Psulim, limbs of a carbon which are possible to be offered. So just remember again, when it comes to limbs of most carbonos, what's the halacha? Even if it's possible to be offered, what's the halacha? Im alu lo yerdu. You shouldn't offer it up, but once you go ahead and you offer it, once you bring it up, it doesn't have to be taken down. What happens if I never placed the limbs on the mizbeach? Instead, what did I do? I held the limbs in the airspace of the mizbeach. So we'll say, is that tantamount to coming on? So we'll say, this is a very simple case, right? The Pashas, this could happen all the time. How does this happen? The Kohen carries the limbs up the mizbeach. So now he's standing on top of the mizbeach. So we'll say, the limbs have never touched the mizbeach itself. The limbs are in the airspace of the Mizbeach. So do we say that the airspace of the Mizbeach ultimately again acquires the limbs for the Mizbeach to the point that now we would say Im Alu, now that they're on the Mizbeach, Lo Yerdu. Avir Mizbeach ki Mizbeach Dami Olo. Fundamental Shaila. Olo, Rashi, ki Mizbeach Dami Yerdu. Or do we say no? That in other words, when do we say that if invalid sacrificial limbs came on the Mizbeach that we don't take them down? And we'll say, when is that? When you actually put it down. Once you put it down on the Mizbeach, you don't take it back. But if you're just holding it in the air, it's in the Avir of the Mizbeach, then no, and you realize what you did is wrong, you take it back down. That's the Shaila. So Tashma, Keshem Sham Mizbeach Mekadesh, Kach Kevesh Mekadesh. So we'll say, what did the Brisa say? Actually, Brisa says the same thing as the Mishnah. The same way that the Mizbeach ultimately again sanctifies limbs, so too does the ramp. Now watch this. V'i Amrit Avir Mizbeach Lav Ki Mizbeach Tami. And if you want to say that the airspace of the Mizbeach is not like the Mizbeach, then Avir Kevesh Nami Lav Ki Kevesh Dami. Then I will say, if that's the case, then what? In other words, we assume that there's one din of airspace. So if you are going to tell me that the airspace of the Mizbeach does not acquire the item, in other words, that being in the airspace of the Mizbeach is not like being at rest of the Mizbeach, then you'd have to say that's what? You'd have to say that being the airspace of the ramp is also not the equivalent to what? To being on the ramp itself. So therefore, again, Avir Kevesh Nami Lavki Kevesh Nami. If that's the case, Heichi Masik Le Mi Kevesh Lamizbeach Havi Le Yorud. So we'll say ultimately again that I don't understand. Then how can you ever go ahead and bring something from the Kevesh to the Mizbeach? Ultimately, again, it should be ultimately like the din of Yorud. It should be taken down. So hear what the Gemara is asking over here. Heichi masikli mikevesh lemizbeach havi le yorod. See, both say, if that's the case, then ultimately again at the airspace of the ramp is also. If you hold that the airspace of the Mizbeach is not like the Mizbeach, then the airspace of the ramp is not like the ramp. If that's the case, then halacha lamaisa, how are you ever bringing anything from the ramp to the Mizbeach? To which the Gemara says, dinagidle. Oh, well, I'll tell you how. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Hechi mastikle mikevesh lo Mizbeach. Ha ki magbale ba'avir hakevesh havile yarud utnan im lo yard le'as. We'll say, now just watch this for just a moment. Remember, in order to get to the top of the Mizbeach, where do you have to go? Where do you have to go? Up the ramp. If you tell me that airspace is not the equivalent to being at rest on the ramp or on the top of the Mizbeach, that means when you carry something up the ramp, Rabbi say, that's the equivalent of what? That's the equivalent of being on the floor. If that's the case, then how are you ever permitted to carry something up the ramp to the Mizbeach? Ultimately, again, it's as if it's at rest on the floor. It's as if it's come off the Mizbeach, and therefore shouldn't be offered. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you how. Dinagidle. You drag it. You drag it. So if you're dragging something up the ramp, then what? It's considered to be at rest on the ramp. You're therefore also dragging it onto the Mizbeach. It's considered to be at rest on the Mizbeach. But 1 second, there's a problem. V'ha'avir yesh bein kevesh l'Mizbeach. We'll say, but we've spoken about this before. There was a space between the top of the ramp and the Mizbeach, which means that even if you're dragging it on the Mizbeach itself, there's still that space, which presumably would require you to what? To pick it up. Once you're picking it up, if you say avir, airspace, is not the equivalent of the ramp or of the Mizbeach, then what? It should have the din of yarut, of an item taken off the Mizbeach, and therefore again should not be offered, to which the Gemara says no. So the Gemara says, Rubo lekevesh kekevesh, Rubo lemizbeach kekemizbeach. We'll say, we're assuming you're still dragging it. When the majority of the item is on the ramp, it's like it's on the ramp. And once the majority of it is transferred on, ultimately again to the Mizbeach, it's like it's on the Mizbeach. So we'll say, so we still have this, so we're still not sure. We're still not sure exactly what is the status of airspace. Is airspace the equivalent of being at rest on the Mizbeach or on the ramp? Or is airspace considered to be, you might as well just be on the ground itself? So tivshot mehad de bayrayim barachama. So we'll say, it would appear that we can resolve this based on the question of Rayim barachama. What does Rayim barachama say? So the Gemara says, yesh chibur li olin, o lo. So ultimately, again, we'll say, is there, look at Rashi for just a moment. So yesh chibur ba'olin, the lo chashvina le keman de mifras va'azlin behu basaruba, o ein chibur. But say ultimately again, do we say that there is a chibur, that there is a connection between that which is brought up on the Mizbeach or not? So tifshot diyesh chibur. Learn out that ultimately again, there is a chibur. We'll say what we're asking over here is, look at Rashi for just a moment. Yesh chibur ba'olin, de lo chashvina lehu kimad de mifras va'azlinan behu, basar ruba o ein chibur. Look at the next Rashi. Tifshot yesh chibur, the ein chibur, kama de mata kineget avir ifsile, or bikrisos garsinalei. So we'll say, so the shaila over here is that do we say that if part of the offering is sitting on the mizbeach itself, do we say that ultimately again there's a connection between that which is not on there and that which is there? To which the Gemara says, tifshot yesh chibur, halo kasha tifshot. So we'll say that question. Everyone agrees that what? Everyone agrees that when part of the sacrificial part is on the Mizbeach, then what? There's a chibur, there's a connection, and we assume that the entire part is sitting on the Mizbeach. That was never our question. What was our question, Abosai? What was our question? Our question is when no part of it is touching the Mizbeach. It's suspended in the airspace of the Mizbeach. Do we say that the item is at rest on the Mizbeach or not? So we'll say that's the shaila that we have not yet solved. So when part of the sacrificial part is on the Mizbeach, and I'm holding the rest in my hand, that everyone agrees it's kilu, it's at rest on the Mizbeach. The shaila is what's the status of the airspace? That's the issue that has still not been resolved. Maskifla Rava bar Rav Chanan. Vi amrit avir Mizbeach ki Mizbeach tami. Also listen to this. If you want to say that the airspace of the Mizbeach is the equivalent of the Mizbeach, then olas ha'of de pasla b'machshava heichi mishkach osla. We'll say, get ready for this. How can you ever have a case, we'll say, of olas ha'of? Remember again, olas ha'of you do malika on it. Where do you do malika? You do malika on top of the mizbeach. So we'll say, we've said before that if you have a pasal machshava, let's say again, I have in mind to go ahead and what? I have in mind to eat the korban in Tel Aviv, right? So that would be a machshava that ultimately would pass all the korban. Well, so listen to the Shai the Gemara saying, if you hold that airspace is the equivalent of the mizbeach itself, then how can you ever have a case of olas hof where malika is done on top of the mizbeach, the pasla b'machshava, where there would be an invalidating thought? We're supposed to say that should never work. Why? Ha kalta mizbeach. We'll say if you hold the airspace of the mizbeach acquires the item, where is the kohen doing malika? Where is he doing malika? On top of the mizbeach. That means at the moment that he's doing the malika, what happens? It's as if what? That bird is actually sitting on top of the mizbeach. If that's the case, Rabbosai, then having a thought to eat it somewhere else should not invalidate the korban. Maskif Rav Bar Ashi Alma lo mashkachas lo ki alama lo. No, it's not true. You can find the following case: mashkachas lo ki gom de amar hareini molka al manas lahorida lamachar ulahalos alaktira. No, you can have a case. What's the case where he says explicitly, "I'm doing malika on the condition to take this off the mizbeach and to bring it back on tomorrow and to offer it up." So we'll say, if he explicitly says that this is my kavanah to take it down and then to bring it back up, okay? So we'll say, going back now for just a moment, that makes sense according to Rava, who says that if you leave an item unoffered over the course of the night on the top of the mizbeach, the psul of lina sets in. Ella. So lessa lemachshavto. So we'll say, but according to Rabbi, who says that if you leave an animal unoffered on top of the mizbeach, we'll say that is not the psul of lina. Then what is there to say? The Rabbi nami meshkachas la kigom de amar harini molka amanas la rida kodem amud hashachar. So according to Rabbi, you can have the following case where the Kohen says, "I'm going to do malika on the condition to go ahead and take it down from the mizbeach before amud hashachar." And bring it back on after Amud HaShachar. So we'll say that would be the case ultimately again of an invalidated bird offering. So we'll stop over here for today, but understand what we're stopping with. So we'll say we've answered a lot of kashas today and covered a lot of halacha l'maisa ground. The one piece that we still leave unresolved, but don't worry, we will resolve it in Mir Tashem tomorrow, is status of airspace. Does the airspace of the Mizbeach ultimately again have the same status of the Mizbeach itself or not? That seems to be subject to Machlokas and Mir Tashem resolution tomorrow morning. Shkoyach. Give Shansia